Good afternoon. Today is Sunday, March 20th, 2nd, 2020. Pandemics that changed history. As human civilizations rose, these diseases struck them down. In the realm of infectious diseases, epidemic is the worst case scenario. When an epidemic spreads beyond a country's borders, that's when the disease officially becomes an epidemic. Communicable diseases existent during humankind's hunter-gatherer days, but the shift to agrarian life 10,000 years ago created the communities that made epidemics more possible. Malaria, tuberculosis, leprosy, influenza, smallpox, and other first appeared during this period. The more civilized humans became, building cities and forging trades routes to connect with other cities and winning wars with them, the more likely pandemics became. See a timeline below of pandemics that, in ravaging human population, changed history. 430 before Christ, at Thames. The earliest recorded pandemic happened during the Peloponnesian War, after the disease passes through Libya, Ethiopia, and Egypt, and crosses the Athenian walls as the Spartans laid siege. As much as two-thirds of the population died. The symptoms included fever, thirst, blood, thirst, and togue, red skin, and lesions. The disease is suspected to have been typhoid fever, weakened the Athenians significantly and was a significant factor in their defeat by the Spartans. 165 Anno Domini, Antony Plague. The Antony Plague was possibly an early appearance of smallpox that began with the Huns. The Huns then infected the Germans, who passed it to the Romans, and the return troops spread throughout the Roman Empire. Symptoms include fever, sore throat, diarrhea, and if the patient lived long enough, respiratory disorders. This plague continued until about 118 Anno Domini, claiming Emperor Marcus Aurelius as one of these victims. 250 Anno Domini, Cyprian Plague, named after the first known victim, the Christian bishop of Carthage. The Cyprian Plague entailed diarrhea, vomiting, throat ulcers, fever, and gangrenous hands and feet. City dwellers fled to the country to escape infection, but instead spread the disease further, possibly starting in Ethiopia, and passed through northern Africa into Rome, onto Egypt, and northward. There were recurring outbreaks over the next 3 centuries. In 444 Anno Domini, it hit Britain and obstructed defense efforts against the Picts and the Scots, causing the British to seek help from the Saxons, who would soon control the island. 441 Anno Domini, Justinian Plague. First appearing in Egypt, the Justinian Plague spread through Palestine and the Byzantine Empire, and throughout the Mediterranean. The plague changed the course of the empire, scouting Emperor Justinian's plans to bring the Roman Empire back together and cause a massive economic struggle. It is also credited with creating an apocalyptic atmosphere that spurred the rapid spread of Christianity. Recurrence over the next 2 centuries eventually killed about 50 million people, 26% of the world population. It is believed to be the first significant appearance of the bubonic plague, which features enlarged lymphatic glands and carried by rats and spread by fleas. 11th century leprosy. Thought it had been around for ages, leprosy grew into a epidemic in Europe in the Middle Ages, resulting in the building of numerous leprosy-focused hospitals to accommodate the vast number of victims. And slow developing bacterial diseases that cause sores and deformities. Leprosy was believed to be a punishment from God that ran in families. This belief led to moral judgment and the ostracization of victims. Now known as Hansen's disease, it still afflicts tens of thousands of people a year and can be fatal if not treated with antibiotics. Uh, 13 TBT, the Black Death, responsible for the death of the third of the world population. The second largest outbreak of the bubonic plague, possibly starting in Asia and moving west in caravans, entering through Sicily in 1347 and Domini, when plague sufferers arrived in the port of Messina. It spread throughout Europe rapidly. That Paris became so prevalent that many remained rooting of the ground and created and the constant state in cities. England and France were so incapacitated by the plague, but the countries called a truce to the war. The British feudal system collapsed when the plague changed economic circumstances and demographics, ravaging population in Greenland. Vikings lost the strait to wage battle against the native populations, and their exploration of North America halted. 1492, the Columbian Exchange. Following the arrival of the Spanish in the Caribbean, diseases such as smallpox, measles, and the bubonic plague were passed along to the native population by the Europeans. With no previous spores, these diseases devastated indigenous people, with as many as 90% dying throughout the North and the South continents. Upon arrival on the island of Hispaniola, Christopher Columbus encountered the Taino people, population 60,000. By 1548, the population stood at less than 500. This scenario repeated itself throughout the Americas. In 1520, and the Aztec empire was destroyed by smallpox infection brought by African slaves. Research in 2019 even concluded that the death of some 56 million Native Americans in the 16th and 17th centuries, largely through disease, may have altered the Earth's climate and vegetation growth, grown on previously tilled land, draw more CO2 from the atmosphere and causing a cooling event. 65, the Great Plague of London. In another devastation occurrence, the bubonic plague led to the death of the 20% of London's population. As human death toll mounted and the mass grave appeared, hundreds of thousands of cats and dogs were slaughtered as the possible cause of the disease spread through ports along the Thames. The worst of the outbreak tapered off in the fall of 1666, around the same date as another destructive event, the Great Fire of London. 1817, first cholera epidemic, the first of 7 cholera pandemic over the next 150 years. This wave of the small intestine infection originated in Russia, where 1 million people died, spread through feces, infected water, and food. The bacterium was passed along to British soldiers who brought into India, where millions more died. The reach of the British Empire and its navy spread cholera to Spain, Africa, Indonesia, China, Japan, Italy, Germany, and America, where it killed 150,000 people. A vaccine was created in 1885, but the pandemic continued. 1855, the third plague pandemic, started in China and then moved to India and Hong Kong. The bubonic plague claimed 50 million victims. Initially spread by flares during a mini boom in Yunnan. The plague is considered a factor in the Parthai Revolution and the Taiping Revolution. India faced the most substantial casualties, and the epidemic was used as an excuse for repressive policies that sparked some revolt against the British. The pandemic was considered active until 1960, when the cases dropped below a couple hundred. 1875, Fiji measles pandemic. After Fiji ceded to the British Empire, a royal party visited Australia as a gift from Queen Victoria. Arriving during a measles outbreak, the royal party brought the disease back to the island, and it was spread further by the tribal heads and the police who met when them upon their return. Spreading quickly, the island was littered with the corpses that were scavenged by the wild animals, and the entire village died and were burned down, sometimes with the sick trapped inside the fires. On third of Fiji's population, a total of the 40,000 people died. 1889, Russian flu. The first significant flu pandemic started in Siberia and Kazakhstan, traveled to Moscow, and made its way into Finland and then Poland, where it moved into the rest of Europe. By the following year, it had crossed the ocean into North America and Africa. By the end of 1819, 360,000 had died. 1980, Spanish flu. The avian-borne flu resulted in 50 million deaths worldwide. The Spanish flu is theorized to have originated in China and being spread by Chinese laboratories being transported by rails across Canada on their way to Europe. In North America, the flu first appeared in Kansas in early 1918 and was visible in Europe by spring. World Services report of the flu outbreak in Madrid in the spring of 1918 led to the pandemic being called the Spanish flu. By October, hundreds of thousands of Americans died and the body storage scarcity hit crisis level. But the flu threat disappeared in the summer of 1919, when the most of the infected had either developed immunity or died. 1957, Asian flu, starting in Hong Kong and spread throughout China and then into the United States. The Asian flu became widespread in England, where, over 6 months, 40,000 people died. A second wave followed in the early 1958, causing an estimated total of about 1 1.1 million deaths globally, with 116,000 deaths in the United States alone. A vaccine was developed effectively containing the pandemic. 1981, HIV, AIDS, first identified in 1981, AIDS destroys a person's immune system, resulting in eventual death by disease that the body would usually fight off. Those infected by the HIV virus encounter fever, headache, the allergic lymph nodes, ample infection. When symptoms subside, carriers become highly infectious through blood and genital fluid, and the disease destroys T cells. AIDS was first observed in American gay communities but is believed to have developed from a chimpanzee virus from West Africa in the 1920s. The disease, which spreads through certain body fluids, moved to Haiti in the 1960s, and then New York and San Francisco in the 1970s. Treatments have been developed to slow the progress of the disease, but 35 million people worldwide have died of AIDS since its discovery, and a cure is yet to be found. 2003, SARS, first identified in 2003 after several months of cases. Several acute respiratory syndromes is believed to have possibly started with the bats, spread to cats and then to humans in China, followed by 26 other countries, infecting 8,096 people with 774 deaths. SARS is characterized by respiratory problems, dry cough, fever, and the head and the body aches. In the spread through respiratory droplets from coughs and the sneezes. Quarantine efforts probably effective, and by July, the virus was contained and has not reappeared since. China was criticized for trying to suppress information about the virus at the beginning of the outbreak. SARS was seen by global health professionals as a wake-up call to improve outbreak response, and the lessons from the pandemic were used to keep diseases like H1N1, H1N1, Ebola, and Zika under control. 2019, COVID-19. On March 11th, 2020, the World Health Organization announced that the COVID-19 virus was officially an epidemic after barreling through 114 countries in 3 months and infected over 118,000 people, and the spread wasn't anywhere near finished. COVID-19 is caused by a novel coronavirus, the family of the viruses, and includes the common flu and SARS. Symptoms include respiratory problems, fever, and cough, and can lead to pneumonia and death. Like SARS, it is spread through droplets from sneeze. The very first case in China appeared in November 17, 2018-19 in the Hubei province, but went unrecognized. 8 more cases appeared in December, which researchers point to an unknown virus. The Chinese government attempted to suppress news of the virus, which delayed preventive action. The world learned about COVID-19 when ophthalmologist Dr. Li Weilian defied government orders and released safety information to the other doctors. The following day, China informed the WHO and they charged Li with a crime. Li died from COVID-19 just over a month later. Without a vaccine available, the virus spread beyond Chinese borders, and by the end of January appeared in 10 more countries, including the United States, France, Australia, and South Korea. On February 11th, the infection was officially christened COVID-19, but mid-March there were at least 220,000 cases worldwide, with more than 10,000 in the US.
Infectious diseases have had some pretty major impacts on human history, and that's putting it mildly. Take the Black Death of the Middle Ages, which wiped out more than a third of the population of Europe, or smallpox, which hitched a ride to the Americas on ships and decimated native peoples. We've been haunted by microbial enemies, but sometimes our drive to understand them has laid the foundations of modern science. So here are 6 of history's most devastating diseases and how they affected us in some pretty big ways. We'll start our list with plague, caused by the bacteria Yersinia pestis. It's transmitted to people when they're bitten by fleas carried by rodents. Most famous for the 14th century outbreak called the Black Death, plague bacteria actually caused 3 different forms of the disease. You've probably heard of the most common one, bubonic plague. It's when these bacteria target the lymphatic system, which helps protect your body from junk-like toxins. Between 2 and 6 days later, infected victims get a high fever, headaches, and vomiting. Plus, they get swollen lymph nodes, called buboes, which give the plague its name. Bubonic plague causes plenty of damage on its own, but if it's left untreated, it can develop into another form, though these kinds can also occur on their own. If the bacteria infect the bloodstream, it's called septicemic plague. They can cause clots that keep blood from reaching tissues, which turn black as they die. Or if the microbes infect the lungs, it's called pneumonic plague. This can lead to bloody coughs and rapid death, and lets people transmit the plague through tiny droplets in the air. Today, all forms of plague can be treated using antibiotics, but they used to kill half or more of infected patients, which had some huge effects on society. The first confirmed plague epidemic was called the Justinian plague. It swept through the Roman Empire starting in 541 CE and contributed to its fall. In the Roman capital of Constantinople, it's estimated that upwards of 5,000 people per day were killed at its peak. The second big wave reached Europe in 1347, when merchant ships arrived in Italy full of sick sailors. The Black Death swept through the continent in just a few years, and during that time, it's estimated that a quarter to half of all Europeans died, some 25 million people. Over the next couple centuries, plague kept cropping up, and the first quarantines were implemented. At the time, it was thought that infectious diseases were transmitted by bad air, so officials tried to isolate sick people and those traveling from places that had an outbreak to prevent more deaths. And even though the science was wrong, quarantines helped prevent the spread of pneumonic plague between people and control the rats with fleas that carried plague bacteria. The last huge wave of outbreaks began in 1894 in rural China, sweeping through Asia and Australia. And finally, after a few decades, scientists discovered the bacteria and carriers behind it all, which let us start squashing out this disease. Smallpox was also a major cause of death in the past and killed nearly 30% of all people who had it. It's a disease caused by the variola virus, which starts with high fever and headache. Then small bumps full of infectious fluid appear all over. Those are the pox. And in survivors, they eventually scab and turn into scars. Humans infected each other through tiny droplets coughed or sneezed through the air. But in a super gross twist, the pox fluids and crusty scabs got all over clothes and blankets and could infect new hosts too. Now, smallpox was devastating for lots of human history, but it hit especially hard when colonists from Europe invaded the Americas. The native populations had immune systems that were adapted to fight off local diseases, not foreign ones. So the variola virus infected and killed huge numbers of them. Overall, diseases like smallpox may have caused the death of up to 90% of the Native American population. Smallpox likely helped the Spanish conquer the Aztec Empire too. Though it's not nearly on the same scale, the European colonists were also hurt by the disease. Like, some estimates think that George Washington lost more troops to the smallpox epidemic of 1775 to 1782 than in battle during the Revolutionary Revolutionary War. Casualty rates got a little better after an army-wide variolation, or intentionally infecting people with a bit of gunk from a patient's scabs to hopefully help them build immunity. Exposing people to the virus in a controlled way ended up being safer than normal, but they still suffered from some symptoms and there was a risk of death. Later, doctors tried to make it less dangerous by using people or animals infected with cowpox, a less harmful cousin of smallpox caused by the vaccinia virus. This process was called vaccination, and led to the eradication of smallpox and to all the vaccines we rely on today. Speaking of diseases that crossed oceans, let's talk about syphilis. Scientists think this sexually transmitted bacterial infection may have made its way to Europe in colonists returning from the Americas. It's caused by Treponema pallidum bacteria, and the initial symptoms aren't fun: rashes, sores, fever, headaches, and muscle pain. It's transmitted by direct contact with the sores or passed down from an infected mother to her child. After a few weeks or months, though, the rashes and sores disappear and the disease goes into a latent stage where it can be detected in a blood test, but it doesn't cause any symptoms. And in up to a third of untreated cases, the disease comes roaring back to cause dementia, dysfunction of multiple organs, lots of pain, and death. The first recorded outbreak of syphilis began in 1495, after a victory celebration by the French army with infected sex workers. So the people of the time started to call it the French disease. And it was pretty deadly, possibly because the disease was new to Europe and people didn't have any immune resistance to it. It's hard to say how many people syphilis killed because we didn't have any medical records that tracked cause of death. Not to mention, sexually transmitted infections were considered shameful, so many people tried to hide them or pass them off as other things, like leprosy. What we do know is that the disease ravaged the world until one of the first antibiotics ever developed put an end to it. Around the turn of the 20th century, the immunologist Dr. Paul Ehrlich had discovered that certain dyes only bonded to specific types of cells in his lab. This finding led him to believe that certain compounds could target disease-causing agents, like bacteria, without attacking healthy tissues, a treatment that would later be called chemotherapy. Using a systematic screening process, Ehrlich found a chemical that he developed into an anti-syphilitic drug called salvarsan. It quickly became the most prescribed drug in the world, and the process that led to its discovery earned Ehrlich the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1908. Caused by a bacterium called Vibrio cholerae, cholera is a severe gastrointestinal disease that causes vomiting and diarrhea. As soon as 12 hours after infection, these bacteria produce toxins that bind to small intestine enzymes that control water secretion from the rest of the body. Specifically, the toxin makes these enzymes flood the intestines with water, and that leads to dehydration so severe that it's deadly. There were reports of similar sounding diseases in India as early as 1000 CE, but cholera didn't become a global problem until the 19th century, when widespread trade started happening. Cholera caused a lot of fear wherever it went, and even today it's a public health problem, with estimated millions of cases a year and 100,000 deaths. Nowadays, we know that cholera is spread through drinking water that's been contaminated by infected poop particles. But when it hit England in the 1830s, medicine was ruled by the idea that disease, whether it's Black Plague or cholera, was caused by bad air from corpses, impure people, or even from swamps. So in 1854, when a doctor named John Snow traced almost every victim of a cholera outbreak in London to a single water pump, nobody really believed him. Town officials removed the pump's handle, which kept people from drinking that water, to humor him. And new cases of cholera dropped off sharply. But people still didn't buy his ideas until a local minister set out to prove him wrong. And that failed spectacularly. His report actually ended up tracing the outbreak to a dirty diaper from a baby who'd contracted cholera outside of London. Dr. Snow's revolutionary methods to track infection patterns and find the source of an outbreak is why he's considered one of the fathers of modern epidemiology. So it turns out this John Snow might have known something after all. Mosquitoes are a well-known pest when it comes to spreading disease, and yellow fever is no exception. It's a viral infection, and most people infected with flavivirus experience symptoms like fever, chills, aches, fatigue, and vomiting. An unlucky 15% or so of patients have it much worse, with bleeding, jaundice, and multi-organ failure, which can lead to death. Today we have a vaccine for yellow fever, but that wasn't the case in the 1880s, when the French started building the Panama Canal. We knew that yellow fever was a thing, but not how it was transmitted, so we couldn't stop people from getting sick. More than 20,000 workers died of either yellow fever or malaria, or a fun combination of both, so the French quit construction in 1889. It wasn't until the 1900s that we discovered mosquitoes were the culprit, and the US was able to fight the disease and finish the canal. They drained pools of water near towns and houses, which is where mosquitoes lay their eggs, and they covered water that they couldn't drain with films of oil to smother the larvae that had already hatched. And they dumped pesticides everywhere else, trying to kill all the mosquitoes they could find. The last disease in our list is a bit different from the others. It's not transmitted, it's inherited. inherited, and that's why it used to be called the royal disease. Hemophilia is a disorder that makes it hard to form blood clots, causing victims to bleed out from minor wounds that would normally seal up. Humans have 20 different proteins that help form blood clots, but hemophilia is caused by problems in just 2, and both of the genes involved are on the X chromosome. Humans have 22 pairs of non-sex chromosomes, so you have 2 copies of each gene, plus a 23rd pair that's usually either XX or XY, and you get half of your genes from each parent. For a dominant trait, you just need one of your 2 genes to express the trait, like having a widow's peak. Recessive traits, on the other hand, need 2 copies to be expressed, so people can have only 1 copy, not express the trait, and still pass it on to their kids. They're called carriers. Now, recessive traits on sex chromosomes can work a little differently, because they're not necessarily identical. People who are XY don't have a backup copy of either set of genes, so recessive diseases caused by genes on the X chromosome just get expressed. And that's exactly what happened with hemophilia. Historically, to try and remain purebloods, the royal families of Europe were notorious for incest, and 2 related people have a higher chance of both being carriers for the same recessive trait, because they share more genes than unrelated people. Queen Victoria of England was a carrier for hemophilia, and 1 son and 3 grandsons bled out from minor injuries by early adulthood. The most famous of her dangerously bleeding descendants was the Russian prince Alexei Romanov. The Romanov family kept their only heir's sickness a secret, not wanting to appear weak, and they put their trust in the so-called magical healing abilities of Siberian Grigory Rasputin. The perceived influence Rasputin had over the royal family led to tension with the general public, and may have hastened the execution of the royal family in 1918 during the Russian Revolution. So maybe recessive disorders are why the Lannisters and Targaryens are so messed up. The perceived influence Rasputin had over the royal family led to tension with the general public, and may have hastened the execution of the royal family in 1918 during the Russian Revolution. So history is shaped by lots of forces, especially things like human health. These 6 diseases caused widespread death, changed societies, and revolutionized what we know about medicine in ways that still impact us today. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow, which is produced by Complexly, a group of people who believe the more we learn, the better we get at being humans. If you want to learn more about human health, check out one of our sister channels, Healthcare Triage, at youtube.com/healthcaretriage.
Unfortunately, we are living in the new pandemic. Right now, the COVID-19. This is terrible for the right now this new century. The world is connected. So this disease spreads very, very fast. Unfortunately. So I said in another videos about this very important. Wash the hands. Wash the hands. Don't touch the eyes, nose, and the mouth. Because not touch. Don't wash the hands. Don't touch this part. Keep the house open. The window open. Let them enter wind, rain, sun rays. Right now, don't exist any vaccine against the coronavirus. But I think it is 90 or 100,000 people is recovered. It's a good sign. It's a good sign against the coronavirus. It's the same in China. The number of death of the new cases is below. Is very, very good news. But this pandemic will continue during 2, 3, 4, 5 months. The world economy is crash. Many people will lose their employers. Many countries are closed. So stay in home. Stay in home. E I hope que this pandemic can be disappear quickly. E I know que after this pandemic, the world will be different. Thank you very much for watching my new video. Share this video, comment, give a like, and subscribe. It's very, very important because it's my motivation to continue to bring international news about this pandemic. So please subscribe, okay? And good luck for everyone. Thank you very much. Good Sunday. Good weekend.